Good evening. We're now about to start the last session of this two-day international conference. Thank you so much for staying with us. And for our last session, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Latanya Sweeney, who is the Daniel Paul Professor of the Practice of Government and Technology at the Harvard Kennedy School and in the Harvard Faculty of Arts and Sciences. A former Chief Technology Officer at the US Federal Trade Commission, she's an award-winning pioneer of the field known as data privacy. She's the director and founder of the Public Interest Tech Lab, editor-in-chief of Technology Science, and the director and founder of the Data Privacy Lab. Latanya was a dear friend of Jan and a friend of Ottawa and CLTS, and that delivered a few years ago the Didier G. Martin annual lecture. Sadly, was subject to some of those documentation issues at the border that we were mentioning and couldn't be in person with us tonight. But luckily for us, she's able to join through Zoom. So we're going to kick off with a short keynote conversation, a short keynote on Zoom, and then we'll continue with a conversation that will be facilitated by Professor Jane Bailey, who doesn't need any more introduction at this stage, and myself. Thank you so much. Latanya, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I am so sad not to be there with you in person, but amazed in some ways at the technology that allows me to be there with you virtually. And in fact, that's what this talk is really about, is how technology has transformed our lives. You know, a lot of historians call this the third industrial revolution, putting the start date as roughly 1950 with the invention of the semiconductor. And of course, that led to the internet, mainframe computers, the internet, personal computers, iPhones, if you will, the Internet of Things, and of course, most recently, the AI revolution, all of which are like revolutions within a revolution. And we don't know when this is going to end, but already it's changed how we work, how we talk, how we give a lecture, how we communicate and play with each other. I'd like to talk today a little bit about how this process has transformed us from kind of a democracy to a technocracy, and sort of what what are the lessons learned of how we got here, and what can we take away from it as we want to think about going forward. Let me see, is the screen being shared properly? If I could get a feedback on that.
Perfect.
It is not, or it's perfect?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, wonderful. All right, as long as you, okay, cool. All right, great. Before I start though, I just want to just give a big shout out and a hug and to all of you who know Ian Kerr and who have spent time with him. Normally my slides don't have words on them. I put words on this slide because I was afraid I'd get too emotional and wouldn't be able to actually say them. But I just really, this is a tremendous honor and a tribute to him. And I really cherish him and miss him as a friend and as a collaborator. I just find myself returning to his words and his jokes very often, and I wish he was here to see this, because in many ways it's a culmination of times we spent together. So this is what a camera looked like at the time American jurisprudence was going to try to figure out what were going to be the rules of photographing people's images. And after about 10 years in courts and through various procedures, it was decided it's okay to photograph people in public. And this is what a phone looked like at the time America was trying to figure out what were going to be the rules for recording conversation. And again, 10 years through the court systems, through various legal lawsuits and so forth. And it was decided that you needed consent in order to record people's conversations. So taking their public image, no problem. Recording a conversation is a problem. At least you need their consent. In 1983, this thing came to market. And for those of you who are the age of my students, you have no idea what that is. The year, it's the Sony camcorder, or the first Sony device that recorded both video and sound, and a playback device, and it was sold to consumers. And people forked over a lot of money for one of these big contraptions, and you can see you have to balance it on your shoulder. You had to focus it with your left hand. Took quite a bit of coordination, but still, it was a pretty good financial success for Sony. Minoru Morio was the executive at Sony responsible for the camcorders, and he calls in one of his chief designers, Yuji Morimiya, and he tells him, the thing is just too big. I need something that will fit in the palm of my hand, and I need it in 18 months. And the designers and engineers at Sony said, that's impossible. You can't just shrink this thing down. If you try shrinking it down, you'll create current so hot that people won't be able to hold it. Some things you can't shrink. We don't even have a microphone that would be that small. And so the 18-month, and Sony threw lots and lots of resources at it. The 18-month deadline came and went, and still they didn't have it. But a few months after that, they did. And off to market it went. And in fact, the design of it looks so similar to what Sony camcorders look like today. And in fact, their first advertising campaign showed it in the palm of a person's hand. And now, if we were at the business school, it rained money, and we would say, and that's the end of the story. Executive has a vision, puts lots of resources into it. Engineers work day and night. They make this thing happen, and we get a new technology. But in this conference, and in the work I do and the work Ian has done, that's just the start of the story. You see, when the Sony camcorder came to market, it had no mute button. And without a mute button, that meant right away we were going to have problems in the United States when people went out and started recording video, because they had no way to not also record sound. And sure enough, people started going to jail. There was a woman who strapped one of those to her child on a school bus, and the school bus, and recorded various atrocities of the school bus driver and a teacher with respect to the child. She takes the recording down to the police department, and they arrest her for illegal wiretapping. There was a protest of students here in the Boston area, and there was a person on the sidewalk who was recording a protester being arrested, and the policeman stopped arresting the protester, turned around and arrested the guy on the sidewalk, and he faced 7 years in prison. Now let's fast forward. Let's fast forward to today. Pennsylvania now has a law that says every school bus must have a video that records video and sound. And the American Civil Liberties Union took that case of the protesters and others all the way through the court system and won us all the right in the United States to record the police in the public service of their duty. So in some ways, the fact that this camcorder didn't have a mute button made America have to change its laws. And which is kind of pretty amazing. We might have changed our laws anyway, but that's not how we go about changing our laws in response to technology. And the other thing about something that's really successful in the marketplace is it gets replicated without question. Today, most of us record video using a smartphone, and there's no mute button there either, even though it would just simply be a matter of a software update. So what does this story tell us? It tells us that technology designers are the new policymakers. We don't elect them, we don't vote for them. Most of them, we don't even know their names. But the arbitrary decisions they make and the designs they create increasingly dictate how we live our lives, and whether or not the laws and regulations that we have set for ourselves are actually the ones we can live by. The Handycam was pretty interesting. It continues to give us these technology society clashes. In 1998, they had one that was really good at low light photography, but if you shot video in daylight, in bright light, it would literally strip away people's clothes and you'd see their tattoos and body parts, and there were these sort of nude-like images of women who were just walking down the street showing up on the internet. And that ended up in a recall that cost Sony about $100 million. Technology doesn't keep track of these, companies don't keep track of these technology society clashes and what happened. So in 2020, the problem was to recur again on a phone made by OnePlus. They had a new feature that also allowed you to photograph very well at night. And the problem, of course, again, was during daylight, it would pose a problem. So I use these examples to make the case that we live in a technocracy, and I mean that in a new definition. What I mean by that is the government or control of our society through the design of technology. That is, the rules that we live by are increasingly determined by what technology allows or doesn't allow. And I want to make the case to you that we live in a technocracy. I have a 15-year-old son. When he was 12 years old, he and I got into a discussion about free speech. And if you're a parent, you probably have all had that discussion with your children. And he began telling me his notion of free speech. Only his notion of free speech was Twitter's notion of free speech, not America's notion of free speech. That is, in America's notion of free speech, the idea of free speech is to give space to the minority voice so that it doesn't get drowned out, so that it has an opportunity to be heard. The idea on Twitter is exactly the opposite. It's mob rule, majority controls, the most aggressive voice succeeds. And what was very alarming is increasingly as I asked my students, my undergrad students, what does free speech mean? They continue to give me Twitter, or now X, definition of free speech. So our notion of who we are as a society and how we live our lives is increasingly being dictated by technology. I should tell you about myself because I'm going to give you an arc of time about these technology society clashes. And one of the first ones that happened, I was fortunate enough in many ways to be a part of. I was a graduate student at MIT at the time in computer science, and you could see this revolution was ahead. And to me, it was going to be the great equalizer, the thing that was going to right all of the wrongs of technology, because one, you could see that it was going to change everything. And I didn't believe technology would have any bias, and it's inexpensive. So all of a sudden, this was going to lead us to a new utopia, a better and more just society. And one day I was walking through the lounge and an ethicist stopped me and said, "Computers are evil." And so I said, "What?" So let me stop and correct her. Doesn't she see the beautiful world ahead? The year is 1996, and she literally foretells the future, a time where technology is violating our social contracts. And so we have this sort of pie in the sky conversation about these issues, about the benefits of technology, and her talking about the perceived harms. Eventually, we narrowed down to a particular example. And the example that she gave me was a set of hospital data. This is hospital data on state employees, their family, and retirees here in the state of Massachusetts. And I talked about, oh, that's great. Now maybe we can find ways to cut costs or do retrospective research to do hypothesis formation around diseases or living with diseases. And she said, yeah, that's all good, provided the data is actually anonymous. And if you look at the circle on the left, you can see that the data set had medical diagnosis information. It didn't have name or address or social security number or anything like that, but it did have demographics, month, day, and year of birth, gender, and a 5-digit zip code. And I did a quick calculation in my head. There are 365 days in a year. Let's say people live 100 years, and there were 2 genders in the database. If you multiply that out, that's 73,000 possible combinations. But I happen to know the typical 5-digit postal code, zip code in the United States only had 25,000 people. That meant that that combination would be unique for most people. So in order to see, I'm trying to prove her wrong, but actually I'm like digging this hole for myself. The proof is going the other way altogether. So I went up to the local city hall and I bought the Cambridge voter list for $20, and it came on 2 5 1/4 inch floppy drives. And again, if you're the age of my students, you have no idea what that means, but they were things you could hold, and they were black and they were floppy because they kind of moved around. And the voter list also had a name and address and some voting information, but it also had those same demographics, month, day, and year of birth, gender, and a 5-digit zip code. And the question was, if you were to link on those, and if it was unique, it would put a name to a particular record, and you would be able to re-identify those. And voter records and records like that have always been public. In fact, in a democracy, they have to be public. What's private is who you vote for, but that you're eligible to vote, that you did vote, is a matter of a public record. So William Weld was the governor of Massachusetts at that time. He had collapsed, and his information was in that data. He lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Only 6 people on that voter list had his date of birth. 3 of them were men, and he was the only one in his 5-digit zip code. That combination of date of birth, gender, and zip code was unique for him in the voter data and unique for him in the health data. And by linking on those fields, we could put his information, we could identify his record to his name. And how that generalizes, it turned we did built a model based on 1990 census data and found that 87% of the population in the United States were unique based on those 3 demographics. So what was interesting about this study is I'm a graduate student. About a month later, I'm testifying down in Washington, D.C. about the Weld experiment. It happens at just the time America's figuring out what would become known as HIPAA, the Health Information, sort of our federal privacy regulation. And the Weld experiment has become known, is cited actually in the preamble, because it wasn't that one data set provided that way. That was how it was done around the world. And laws around the world changed because of the Weld experiment, often citing it. That is, our old practice of just removing explicit identifiers weren't good enough. And what was the technology that had changed all that? Personal computers with reasonably large hard drive space. And reasonably large is less than your cell phone has right now. I mean, it had just to be large enough to hold both the voter data and the health data, and just a little space for a program. Nowadays, it would just be sort of a spreadsheet program to do the matching. And so, but so by 1996, that was possible. And as a result, all these laws change. It launches a new field of study in computer science called data privacy. And so this is sort of the big initiative on the first major technology society clash on the digital part of this revolution was privacy. And if you think about it, we still haven't fixed that. Um, Throughout the 1990s, we just collected more and more data. We've done various studies and updates and mapping all the places here in the United States where a person's typical health data might go. Only part of them are even covered by laws. And so even today, after these decades later, data privacy is completely up for grabs by the design of the technology, whether or not whatever they decide they're going to do with the data for the most part. So this is kind of an uncanny history, being early at something, doing a simple experiment, and watching 1,000 great minds come and follow, and watching laws around the world change. It was certainly revolutionary. It's clear to me that I've spent all of my career still being that graduate student trying to right this wrong of technology. That is, how do I get society to enjoy the benefits of these new technologies without these harms? How do we get closer to the utopia that I believed in? But this was to happen to me again. And so when I became a professor at Harvard, I was giving an interview to a reporter, and he wanted a particular paper. So I typed my name into the Google search bar, and up popped the link with the paper and some ads. And the link to the paper, I show it to him. He says, no, don't tell me about that ads. Tell me about the time you were arrested, because there were these ads popping up implying I had an arrest record, even though I don't. And so we go back and forth about I don't. I eventually have to click the link, pay the $89, show him there is a Latanya Sweeney in the data set, but in fact, there is no criminal record associated with it. But the question is, why did this keep coming up? So he and I spent a couple of hours, and we learned pretty quickly that if your first name was given more often to Black babies than white babies, an ad came up implying you had an arrest record, even if you didn't. And so this is an example of sort of the neutral ads for names that are given more often to white babies than Black babies. And what's interesting about that was twofold. One is the reporter is a white Italian American, and he's the one who says, "Oh, it's because you got one of those black sounding first names." And I didn't know what he was talking about. And the ads were clearly being placed on a full first and last name of a person. So if you just made up a name for which there really was no person, no ad would show up at all. It had to be a first and last name of a real person. But when I typed Latanya into the Google image search bar, and I typed Tanya into the Google's image search bar, I came to realize there are some names given more often to Black babies than white babies, and that this algorithm was taking advantage of this somehow, even if people who it was implying had a record didn't, and people who it didn't imply had a record did. So here in the United States, discrimination is not illegal, but what is illegal are certain groups and certain categories. One of those groups is blacks, and one of those categories is employment. So if you have two people, sort of Ebony and Jill here, and a potential employer types their name into the Google search bar with the intent of finding out what's online about them. And every time they type in Ebony's name, ads pop up implying she has an arrest record. And every time they type in Jill's name, you just get, oh, find more information about her. It creates a disparate impact. And sorry about that. It creates a disparate impact. And in fact, this was the first time an algorithm was subject to be in violation of the US Civil Rights Act. And of course, having a disparity doesn't create an investigation. It had to be at least what they call the 4/5 rule. That is 80% of the time this happens. And that's what we were able to document. I ran 142,000 lookups using VPN networks around the country in order to find it. I'm going to skip ahead about why that's so, and just point out that that means at the time we did that experiment to now, I don't think the Department of Justice has investigated any other occurrences, even though it's the same technology out there. In this case, it was Google AdSense and the way the ad network tended to work. Let me give you another example. This is from an example that Alvaro Bedoya and I used to do. We used to have a tag team talk that we would go around. Alvaro is now one of the commissioners of the Federal Trade Commission. And we talked about a time where a company who had a large database of resumes would be able to provide a service to employers where you give me a description and I'll give you some candidates. And at the time we were doing this, there were no services offered to the public, and now there's tons of them, including really high-level popular ones. But here's what happens with those algorithms, those machine learning algorithms that are behind this. So the first time around, it gives you candidates, and then you the potential employer says, oh, I like these guys. I don't really like these guys. In other words, you have a kind of bias, and the algorithm, if it's a learning algorithm worth anything, is going to learn your personal bias. And over time, all your candidates are going to look like this. That is, that they're going to be young people. And we have a law in the United States against that too. And it's called the Equal Employment Act. But now, unlike what happened with the ads, there's no way I on the outside can actually know that this happened. This is an internal issue between you and the algorithm, or between the employer and the algorithm. So I'll skip the why it's working. I just want to get through a couple more examples. I'm much more anxious to get to the question and answer. But I just want to make sure we kind of can see the arc of problems as they're building up through these clashes. I would use that example to say equal employment is up for grabs. Let me give you another one. This is recidivism algorithms. Recidivism algorithms are used throughout the criminal justice system here in the United States. And what you're seeing here are two people who both are making recommendation about whether or not they should be let out on bail. That is, recidivism meaning they've been arrested, they haven't been found guilty or innocent, but should they just be released and under what condition? The higher the number on a scale to 10, the recommendation is to the judge, absolutely don't let this person out. And the lower the number, meaning that the person is low risk. What's really interesting about these two examples is Brisha Borden, she doesn't look like it, but she's a teenager at the time this photo is taken. She and another girl were walking down the street, and they see this kid run into his house and leave his bicycle out in the yard. They decide they're going to steal his bicycle. So they run over and they grab the bicycle. A neighbor sees them and calls the police and yells at them. They drop the bicycle and they run, but they ran right into the police. And so Brisha gets arrested. Vernon, on the other hand, is arrested for armed robbery of a convenience store. And he had prior offenses that were equally as serious. What's fascinating are these scores where Brescia gets an 8, meaning please don't let her out. She's just a danger to society. And Vernon gets a low rating as well. What's going on in all of these cases, you see these boxes I've been flipping through, is whether the bias is coming from the setup or training data, or whether it's a part of the feedback system, the learning system that the algorithm goes through. In this case, and in all the cases that we've talked about, it's each one of those has been a bias in the training data, meaning these were decisions judges were making all along in Broward County, Florida, this kind of decision here, and now all of a sudden it was encapsulated in an algorithm who basically was making decisions as if it was not biased, but actually perpetuating those biases at large. But in the arc of what we've been talking about, it means criminal justice is up. So the Civil Rights Act, we can't enforce it. How do we think about it? Equal employment, criminal justice, the list goes on and on. I'll just give you a couple more and then we'll kind of close up for question and answer. This is Joy Bawani when she was a graduate student at MIT. What you see the picture on the left, she's looking at the camera on her laptop. And what you're seeing, though, is that the camera doesn't see her. It's a face detection algorithm. In fact, it doesn't see her until she puts a white mask in front of her face. And then you see the active appearance model triangulating for the eyes and the nose and the mouth. And what this was a reflection of, as she went on to do a study, was to show is that face recognition software does really good on pale male faces and really bad as your skin gets darker and if you're a woman rather than a man. And so it does the worst on Black women. In fact, it does so poorly on Black women that IBM and other companies ended up stopping and recalling their software and stopped selling their face recognition algorithms because of this bias. And again, it's that same problem we talked about, is that bias in training data. The way face recognition algorithms were grown, sort of matured, is there every year or so there would be a contest, and the contest, if your algorithm did really well, you would be showered with money and your students would get better jobs and so forth. But the training data that was used during all those competitions tend to be white male faces, and as a result the algorithms overfit to it. We could go on and on. There's a long list of laws, regulations, and so forth here in the United States that are totally up for grabs by what technology design allows or doesn't allow. And I'll put to you, every value is up for grabs. This uncanny history of mine was to happen a third time in 2016 when I decided to take a group of students, and our job was we would just follow the election. And 2016 election in the United States, oh my goodness, it was quite something to behold. One of the things that we found early on was if you typed in where's your local polling place, it would give you the wrong information or no information and so forth. So the students and I were really instrumental in setting up a website that would give you the accurate information. And by the time the election came, okay, it's a new phone. I don't know how to use it, obviously. There we go. Sorry about that. Technology. And so by the time the 2016 election, Google actually had that here in the United States, would do a pop-up to make sure you had accurate information. We also were first to find these, what we call persona bots. These are bots that look and acted like real people on Twitter. And if you looked at their profile pages, they kind of look real. Most of the time they would tweet, they would just be plus oneing something that one of their followers had said. What's interesting about their followers, they're bots, but their followers are all human. And it's a small number of humans. And by plus oneing, they were building up trust, and then they would just deliver this amazing payload of propaganda and disinformation. And so we were able to find thousands of these bots on Twitter. Many of them, the Twitter at that time took down their accounts. Some of them are still around. And then by the time the fall came around, we found a vulnerability in voter registration websites that made it easy to disenfranchise voters. And you could do it across the state. So even though you could just disenfranchise a couple thousand voters, because they're dispersed across the state, the people wouldn't really notice. And at the same time, it could shave off 1 to 5% of the elections, election results. And of course, in the United States, that's enough to switch a state. We're also first to find that problem as well. Okay, right now you're probably pretty. I don't want to end to Q&A on such a depressing note. I want to tell you how we started to turn it around, and what we've been doing about that. If you think about the experiments that I've described to you, the weld experiment, the finding the names using the VPN network, and so forth. None of these are rocket science. They're simple experiments that we could teach students to do, and that we could do them at scale. So when I was at the Federal Trade Commission, it was just another, I took some time off from the academy and served as the chief technology officer. And one of the things that was there was a repeat of the same issue. That is, people were really good at knowing how to do their job in the brick and mortar buildings. They had no tools or way of thinking about how they do that job online. So while I was there, I was able to build a lab and build a lot of tools and infrastructure so that the FTC could begin doing its job online the way it had done it offline. And so when I come out of the FTC, I realized I could teach a lot of this to students, and that we could begin solving some of these technology society clashes so the society benefits. And so for the last several, 10 years almost, we've been teaching students how to do this. We've had hundreds of students go through. We teach them tools. We teach them that there is a technology life cycle, sort of technology advances through these stages. And depending on where you are in the stage, what your job or your discipline allows, you can intervene, find that clash. If you find it early, like in vision or development, it's just the design. It's like the missing mute button. Sony didn't really want those things to happen. And if they had spotted them early, they would have been spared them. And if they get to the marketplace, then it becomes a lot harder. So we teach them that there are a lot of tools and so forth that you can use. And we also produced a journal. I just want to give you a couple of examples of the kinds of things the students have done. One of the, and then because the student work it themselves, they've gone on to change laws and regulations here in the United States, as well as business practices at some of the big tech companies. Here's one example. Students there had been an earlier study that showed that black hosts versus white hosts in New York City, the black hosts earned about 12% less. They repeated the experiment in Berkeley and Oakland, California, and showed that about 20% showed that Asian hosts made about 20% less. Airbnb came and met with us and the students, and they changed their platform. If you try to run an Airbnb today in the United States, they set the price in order to combat this problem. And so this is an example of how they've changed, how my students have made changes. There's tons of these examples. I'll just give one more and try to move us towards opening it up. This was right when ChatGPT was still in its youth. One of my students had said, "Hey, wait a second, you could use some ChatGPT to fake public sentiment." So one of the ways the government knows how you feel is from either on an open comment server, the comments that come in to regulations they're getting ready to change, or if you think about even Congress, members of Congress, what kind of emails and letters are they receiving from constituents? And what Max was able to point out was that actually ChatGPT even then was good enough that you couldn't tell the difference between what was real and what was a fake and what was from a human. And so he had ChatGPT at that time make up 1,000 submissions in this federal public comment server and push them in. Goes all the way through. No one ever spotted that they were fake. And then of course he did notify them and they pulled them out. But it's pretty amazing, this sort of deep fake model. And that caused Congress to get engaged and began to deploy other ways in which we respond to federal comment servers. Students have done a lot more. I won't go through all of these issues. We also have some online platforms in response to some of the problems that we've built. One is VoteFlare. We've just released the internal Facebook documents. These were the documents that Frances Haugen had taken 20,000 photos of internal documents from Facebook. Yesterday, earlier this week rather, we released them to the public. We took on the task of solving their privacy problems. And so feel free to visit fbarchive.org. And then we have some technologies coming up for the 2024 election, something that really bothers us around deepfakes, which we call same source, and archiving ads. Let me kind of stop here and get us into the Q&A. But the point I wanted to make in this presentation is that we do live in a technocracy, and that every value that we have is up for grabs, but that there are ways to intervene. The work of my students and I, the number of technology society clashes are way too big for one professor or one school to solve. So over the last 4 years, we've reached out to about 80 schools around the country. Welcome you guys too. And we've been doing this at scale, trying to make a difference. And part of this training allows these students to be technologists, what we call public interest technologists. And they've gone on to work on government committees and civil society organizations and in advocacy groups, teaching them how to do their job in this new lens. In many ways, this talk isn't really about me or my students. The talk is really aimed at encouraging you to get engaged to help us all save the world. I do want to just say, I want to link this over back to my friend and dear colleague, Ian Kerr. And when you think about his scholarship, well, he's not here to talk about generative AI, but I think the thing that when I think about his scholarship and work, or at least in the conversations that he and I would often have, he would probably feel that our screens and technology are becoming a part of our anatomy, and that in that process, we're somehow sacrificing our humanity. We're losing more and more of these face-to-face interactions, more and more understanding of the emotional depth of a handwritten letter or note, or just having the serendipity of unplanned conversations. Those are all things that are becoming rare. And if you think about generative AI, in a year or two, the faces we see, the voices we hear, the messages we read won't even be written by a human at all. And as we enter a kind of a technosphere, it becomes the place that we inhabit. And that's what I mean, he's not here to talk to it, but that's how I think about his legacy and how he would want us to think about this work. Thank you. Now, did I put everybody to sleep? I can't see anyone, so you'll have to tell me if they're still there, or do they all go?
Thank you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Yes,
thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Latanya. And every time I read you or like I listen to you, your research is like so relevant to even like your early research, especially like on data anonymization and like data privacy. It's so relevant to the ongoing debate and policy debate that we have like around the world, especially like in Canada with Bill C-27 that we mentioned a few times during those 3 days. And the previous version of Bill C-27, like the previous C-11, initially had included within the scope of the legal framework anonymized data with like a bit less legal obligation, but still like a cybersecurity and data governance framework. And when the government reintroduced C-27, they had removed that part at the request of industry. I was like, oh no, we had set the light for once for like getting something right. And since I always refer like policymakers and students to like your research, I'm like, just go read Latanya Sweeney's work. She demonstrated this. So anyway, thank you so much for your amazing scholarship and also like this call to action. And maybe that would be my first question for you, because you end up on like generative AI and so like the elections, and we had some conversation about this like over those 3 days. There are so many elections coming up. Like everybody, I think, is a bit like anxious / like in fear of what could happen. What kind of tool maybe do you see like kind of civic tech, intervention we could do to prepare our societies, etc.? Or maybe are you working on such tool to like save our democracy before the next election. I hope so.
Well, it takes all of us. There's nothing one person can do alone. The challenge for 2024, we should all be scared, and I think rightfully so. One of the things that pops up in the FB archive, those leaked Facebook documents, is she captured the internal comments and research that Facebook had done during the 2020 election. And the kind of things that really jump out at you, and notice this doesn't have anything to do with generative AI, but you can see how generative AI is going to put this on steroids. We have no idea how to build trust at scale. We have no idea how to do content moderation at scale. In many ways, the value of FB Archive isn't Facebook. It's helping us understand what it is we don't know how to do and the problems that social media platforms have in trying to do their job. And so the content moderation problem is huge. And plus, one of the things you have English moderators who, in order to understand another language, runs the message through Google Translate. And that puts it out of the social context, as well as whether or not it's even an accurate translation. And so the number one problem, I think, in social media is definitely the lack of content moderation at a time when generative AI allows chatbots to be talking all the time. The second problem in the election space is clearly, just the sheer volume of information. Right now, most of the content on the internet is generated by humans. Within the next year or so, we're going to see a shift. And within 5 years, almost all of the content on the internet is going to be provided by bots. So what does that mean? Well, these bots have the same look, just like all of those algorithms that we talked about had algorithmic bias in them from their data. Well, the same thing is true about ChatGPT. It learned everything it's all of its word associations in its large language model are all learned from the internet. And as a result, if they use a filter, because without that filter, it just comes off as the most racist, sexist, xenophobic system you could imagine. And so they have a program that sits on the outside that tries not to let it out. But it comes through in many other ways, in many other contexts. And so again, for the election, we're likely to get flooded with a lot of content, and whose content do you trust? What's real, what's not? And of course, generative AI isn't just ChatGPT. Generative AI includes amazing fake videos, the ability to take my voice, a snapshot of my voice, and have it say something you want it to say in order to make a video where I'm saying the thing you want me to say, and it looks like me saying it, even though none of it's true, but it looks as real as this video. That's crazy. Right? And all of the ways we would normally think about how we could tell this was fake, they will all defy us. So we are trying to build some tools that will help, but this is a monumental task for sure.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Latanya. It's Jane.
Hi, Jane.
Hi. I still remember the excitement with which Ian introduced us on the ID Trail project, and how thrilled he was to have you on the project and to have you working with us. It was an amazing collaboration, and I can't help but sort of sit here thinking about how many of us who are not technologists are becoming so incredibly, I think disenchanted would be an understatement, with technology, with technological fixes and so on. And I wonder, like, what keeps you going? Help us get some faith back, maybe.
Yeah, well, it's still to be determined how this all turns out. But why do I feel like it's not hopeless? I think is your question. So one thing, I have the opportunity to live. Harvard has a kind of Harry Potter world going on where students are sorted down into what they call houses, which are really large limited institutions. Anyway, my family and I live among 400 undergraduates, and they give me tremendous hope in the future. They really do, because they're inheriting a mess of a world. I mean, on every dimension, it's a difficult situation. Their view towards technology has really shifted. When I was a young professor with all black hair and so forth, and I would teach a data privacy class, I would often wonder why students even bothered to take the class, because all they cared about was this shiny new thing called Facebook, for example, and they just believed in it, and it was only upside to them. And now when I ask students, they're taking all kinds of stealth measures to get privacy. They do various things, and they talk about Facebook. They says, well, that was our parents' generation. And I'm old enough that it's true, right? So they don't have the same attitude or relationship with technology that we do. They're one of the earliest adopters. They feel as though they have to take their own kind of agency, so they come up with various fixes. And what I think we need to do is kind of help them. The other thing that gives me hope is this sort of army of public interest technologists that we've been pushing into industry, pushing into civil society organization, and pushing into government. Why does it give us hope? Because for 25 years, the technology companies have just had a free run. Because the FTC and just name any regulation, they just basically didn't know how to didn't engage. Advocacy groups, everyone just sort of was hands off on technology. And as a result, that's how we got here, because those people who would normally help us, the journalists, the advocates, civil society, judges, and so forth, needed help themselves in order to understand how to do their job. And I think increasingly they're starting to learn. There's still a huge gap. So those are the things that give me hope. The challenges are really great. There are signs of hope. 2024 will be a huge decision will have very large consequences. So it's something that we really do need to get our heads around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can I ask one more question? I'm wondering, some of the discussion that we've had here over the last few days have been sort of around, especially around algorithmic bias, and the idea that a lot of people talk about the sort of the kind of fixes of training sets and so on, and I'm wondering, do you think, and then some of us are sort of thinking, maybe it's actually time to draw some lines in the sand, and to say we're not going to fix that. We're just going to say that's not on. What do you think of that?
Well, in my heart, I'm still that graduate student, Jane, that's trying to right the ship. I want society to get the benefits of these technologies, but without the harms. And I think your question is, but if we don't know how to fix it, and so one of the problems is when a technology gets into the marketplace, it's really hard to fix it, because by the time it's in the marketplace, it's just too late. It's like the Sony mute button or the Sony X-ray showing nude-like images. They had to recall those, and it cost them $100 million. And so these companies aren't going to be recalling their technology. It's too late for Facebook to reinvent its content moderation strategy, or it's too late for Twitter to provide zones for real free speech, right? They're not interested in, or X as it's now called, isn't interested in designing these spaces. And so by the time it's in the marketplace, our choices are very, very limited. Either we have to have an add-on policy, an add-on technology, or something like that. And in many ways, these algorithmic bias issues are like that. What I would like to see done, though, is, at the end of the second industrial revolution was a time kind of like this, not at this scale, not at this magnitude, not happening so fast. but similar. So it used to be that so the second industrial revolution brought us cars, it brought us electricity, it brought us pretty much, and Kleenex, it brought us all the things that we just sort of take for granted. It was slower, and you had to work with, if you were a Ford Motor Company, you had to work with local government because you needed them to pave roads. If you were Edison and you were trying to do electricity, you had to work with local government because somebody had to run those lines into houses and buildings in order to get electricity. We don't have that kind of opportunity to intervene anymore. And so it makes our options even shorter and more difficult. But the other thing that happened was you would buy a toaster oven and you'd plug it into your fancy new electrical outlet, and the thing might blow up in your hands. Or you leave the toaster plugged in and it might set your house on fire. And so the idea that you had to comply or make guarantees that this thing was safe was kind of how the second industrial revolution, how it played out, Underwriters Laboratory and various other kinds of standards. I think something like that for algorithms is needed. Auditing it after the fact is too late, because even if you audit it and you say it's not working, how do they fix that? What we care about is you want us to have the benefits. We want to have the benefits. These are the harms. I need a guarantee. I need a stated actual guarantee with proof that it's not going to have this effect.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. If for people in the audience, if you want to go to the mic to ask a question, but I just want to reflect on it, to link back to one of on what you just said, Latanya, and link back to one of the comments I made on the first panel yesterday morning. So you, in the beginning of your keynote, you mentioned that tech designers are like the new policymakers, like the architects, in the cities have like redesigned like the way we live together. But I think that beyond tech designer and what we've seen with what Sophie Zhang has disclosed, what like Frances has been like unveiling within Meta, is also the role of like project managers and like the marketplace, and that often like overrides some of the concern raised internally, and that's why I've been pushing with a few for better protection for like whistleblowers within big tech, and also like security researchers and public interest security researchers, to make sure that we can like protect the people from inside or outside who could like unveil those kind of issues, hopefully before it's too late. But I see that we have at least already one person lined up in the mic.
Thank you, Dr. Sweeney, for that wonderful presentation. Bita Amani, Queen's University Faculty of Law. I posed this question yesterday afternoon, and I'm going to repose it today to you. Some of the examples that you showed evidencing, demonstrative evidence of harm, and then interventions, including some of the work that your students, as you referenced, have done to address those subsequently. What if, though, and this was a question I raised yesterday, the move from the marketplace, and I actually referenced the word technocracy as well, is to move away with planned obsolescence. So I invoke the example of the media coverage in September of a consumer protection analysis of smart vehicles that had recording on the inside, and their end user, the contracts and their licensing agreements and or sale agreements, I guess, reference the, recording, including, though, in some instances, reference to sexual information as well as personal information. So the market motivation to actually leave dumb devices behind and move to so-called smart devices, given the sort of data economy and the value of that. So how to intervene when the market is driving those regulatory sort of changes, of governance without governments, but in ways that that's not my phrase, that's some literature I've referenced in my own work, but in ways that are actually foreclosing options and governing in effect as well. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, part of this is a bit of an imbalance in how policy is being conducted. So during commercialization of a new technology, the person who has the most power is the company, the business managers in the company, because they know, because we only can really test and know actual harms once the thing is in the marketplace. And so when it's in the commercialization phase, we used to have a string of companies coming to the FTC who want to get out of jail free pass, right? Or who want a new regulation so that it begins to pave the road for their investment so they don't have to solve the harder problem in their own design. And some of what you're describing is like that. I remember, I'm old enough to remember when we had a different set of rules here in the United States for if you wanted to record and privacy around a full 360 of privacy around a landline phone, a phone that plugs into a wall outlet. And the regulation saying, oh, but that doesn't apply if you have one of those luxury items called a mobile phone. And now, of course, everyone has mobile phones, and now the relaxed privacy rules that exist for mobile phones is now become the de facto standard. So that is a part of the regular playbook of how that happens. And unless those who would protect us, the advocates and the regulators, actually know enough or have technologists internal to think this through, it's too easy to fall victim to this kind of problem. You know, we see it even with generative AI. You know, if you look at OpenAI, the head of OpenAI is running around Washington all the time talking about regulate me, please regulate me. You know, and what he's saying is any regulation that they would pass right now would be just too, it'd either be no, stop dead in your tracks, or, okay, it's so general as to allow almost anything, and we wouldn't know where the real harms are until much later. Mm-hmm. You know, and the other thing I would add to that is it's also a matter of how these things are funded. So I've been working a lot recently with venture capital firms in Silicon Valley because, look, if we could get them to use a technologist to help issue spot for technology society clashes, and if we got them to want to bring technology to market that didn't have these clashes, it would be like an insurance policy for them that they wouldn't have an issue. And many of them have been really interested in this concept, though none of them have adopted it yet. But the ones who haven't been interested, the one thing that you hear back from them is sort of that hockey stick on revenues. They're like, well, as long as my revenues happen fast enough, by the time society figures out the clash, I'll be out of it. And so that, I mean, so that's a problem also. So that comes with the nature of that what gives power to technology designers as the policymakers is our adoption of technology in the marketplace.
Thank you so much. Marissa?
Trebek, Harvard Law. My question is about regulating through technical standards. And I was wondering if you had some thoughts about how to avoid industry capture in this extremely sort of elitist space. Whether you think it should be sector specific, in other words, how granular do technical standards have to be in order to be actually effective on the ground, given the wide breadth of AI writ large? And 3, do you think it's important for impacted communities to have a seat at the table? And how would we go about doing that, given the expertise challenge in the traditional way of conceiving expertise, which often discards the sort of first-person expertise of people? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll tell you, don't walk away from the mic because I want to make sure I get all 4 of them, but I'll try them backwards, try them in reverse order. But first, before I answer it the way you worded it, I'm going to answer it slightly differently. Anyone who is a parent knows exactly that none of this technology of apps and tablets and iPhones and smartphones was made for children. You know it right away because there's just everything is retrofitted. Everything is like an afterthought. And it's because, you know what? The designers are 20-year-old guys who didn't have children. Mm-hmm. And so one of the big lesson there is absolutely you need stakeholders at the table. There's in the leaked Facebook documents, there's this interesting document around a survey they did, like who's the most loyal, for lack of a better word, who's the most loyal customers that we have, and it turns out it's Southern Blacks, Blacks who live in the southern part of the United States, and now you say how many of them work at Facebook? And the answer is like virtually none, right? Virtually no Blacks work in video. So who's making these decisions, who's making these tons of design decisions is not even that they're doing it consciously, it's just absorbed from their own worldviews. It becomes really important that there be a voice or an opportunity for other stakeholders to come in. So we have to do that either consciously as part of the design process, through stakeholder investigations, one of the things we teach students, or it has to be done in another way, some other mechanism by which alternative voices, the earlier those voices can get in, the better it is, especially if these are going to be your customers, right? So, or even if they're not your customers, if they're the ones who are losing the most or are suffering the most harms, it becomes really important. The second way that to address this, though, is also, I'm working up the food chain of your questions. The second way to sort of think about this is also kind of related to what I was saying earlier. The groups who would normally represent those groups have not been at the table. They don't have technologists on board to tell them how to do their job, how to do the same thing that they did before, but now how do you do it online? If they have a technologist, it's more likely that the person is keeping their computer running or making sure that they get messages tweeted out and so forth. We're not talking about that. We're talking about how do you run experiments to say whether or not TikTok has a problem with LGBT community? What is it doing with this group or that group? Those are the kinds of experiments that our students are doing, but those experiments really need to be done regularly within civil society and within advocacy groups so that they can take the actions that they would normally take. And then the very first part of your question was, what should regulation look like? You know, how should that do? I go back to, you know, it should, I do like the fact of a technology coming to market with a guarantee. And I don't mean some lukewarm guarantee. Oh, it's a good thing. And that's the entirety of their guarantee. It has no problems. We need something scientifically more rigorous and sound, kind of like a UL listing and so forth, that they're held to financially, so that if they mess that up, there's a real repercussion against it. I'm not a big fan of new laws. And the reason I'm not a big fan is because, like in the space of generative AI, because generative AI is so broad. It's not that, so let me back up for a second. First of all, you're talking to in the United States. In the United States, we have 2,167 privacy laws. If the privacy law goal is to cover the naked body, it's like little bitty dots that all line up on top of each other, leaving the body totally exposed. I have to use this example because when you're in Canada or you're in Europe, where privacy laws drape the whole body, that's not something we have in the United States. And if it's not covered, it's open turf as to what you can do for it, right? So, but what I would say is that we do have a lot of laws, depending on how the AI is used, as to whether or not it's okay, as long as you can see it. So let me give you an example. In class, and we're also dealing with that inside the academy itself, within courses and classes. A student gives you a paper generated from ChatGPT. It's got all made up references. Well, you know, it was never okay to give me a paper that had made up references. I don't need a new rule to say about ChatGPT. You're still going to get the same bad grade because you know what? You can't make up references and give me that paper. Now, I do have to think about my class and reorganize my class a bit differently, but many of the rules are already in place. It's just how do you apply them? How do you know it's happening?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Latanya. I think we will end our conference on that note. Thank you again for joining us online. I would have loved to have you with us, and I'm sure we're going to find a way to invite you back to Ottawa.
Thank you.
Very soon. Thank you again.
Thank you.